Greetings and welcome to Voices from Albion, the Magnetic Minstrel podcast. My name is Richard McPherson and I'll be your host tonight. Pamper yourself with a generous helping of Clutie or perhaps a hearty pint of heavy and sit back while I tell you the tales of the lost Albion Empire and the musical saga of Magnetic Minstrel. Episode 5, Taliesin Silverbrow, The Solitary Minstrel. Chapter 1, Crossing to Albion. Aneurin Harper's first solo sojourn to Albion brought him to the bleak moorlands of western Cornwall. He arrived under the flare of a full moon for which he was grateful, as there was no other light to guide him across the moors. It was under the explicit direction of Calestra that he travelled to a place called Doesmerry Pool, where she would be able to reach out to him from her captivity. As he trekked across the barren terrain, he began to hear the distant call of a pack of hungry wolves. Within moments, he saw the feral creatures crossing with great stealth to surround him. Summoning his courage, he realized this was his first test of courage as Taliesin Silverbrow. Calling forth the light of the halogen lamp in his song staff and the ultrasonic capabilities within his armor, he drove the pack of wild beasts off with a sonic barrage that sent them howling into the night. From there he continued to his rendezvous with Calestra by a secluded lake that was like a mirror of moonlight. Once there, she was able to summon a misty apparition from the waters of the lake. Aneurin was immediately charmed by the beautiful shade of his captive princess. She told him that he should be able to travel due east to a place called Clada Castiel, where he would meet with elements of the Druidic Council that would take him on his next step of his journey through Albion. As he began his journey to Clada Castiel, the reality of what he had undertaken began to weigh on him. Here he was, thousands of miles from home, and an even greater number of years in the past in a foreign land, undertaking a quest that was a complete mystery. Under the blanket of stars, he felt completely alone. As the hours passed in his isolation, he began to feel a peculiar kind of freedom. His armor and song staff empowered him as he walked along the lonely stretch of moors. It was not until he saw the ringing fort of Clada Castiel arising amid an encircling forest in the early light of dawn that he realized he was about to embark on a great journey. As he entered the edge of the forest, a weariness began to overtake him. Finding a secluded glen, he lay down for a much-needed rest before continuing on to the hill fort at Clada Castiel. Chapter 2, Taliesin Silverbrow, Dragon Slayer. He was awoken unceremoniously hours later by the shrill cries of frightened voices coming from the direction of the hill fort. Donning his helm, he walked to the southern edge of the forest, where he immediately saw the reason for the alarm. A great black dragon circled above the hill fort, spewing angry torrents of darkling flame upon the frenzied travellers who were making their way towards the citadel. Reacting almost without thinking, he began to run towards the fortress. He engaged the light of his song staff as he enacted the microphone in his armor, issuing a bellowing challenge to the circling creature. The creature responded immediately by turning about and heading directly towards him. As he pulled up to hover above him, Aneurin cut loose with an ultrasonic barrage from his armor, which sent the creature soaring backward with a painful howl. It regarded him cautiously as it gathered a deep breath to smite him with its flame. Wondering what other parlor tricks he might be able to summon, he jammed the tip of his songstaff into the earth and ignited the halogen lamp in its crown to a blinding brilliance. Almost immediately, he saw that from all directions of a compass, bright trails of rainbow-colored flame raced across the landscape like searing tracks of gunpowder. All of them seemed to be headed directly towards him to converge upon where he stood. Just as the dragon bellowed its great torrent of flame, the rainbow fire intersected with his songstaff and climbed up its stave to the crown summit, where it detonated into an explosion of multicolored flame. There was a crack like thunder, and a single stroke of lightning lanced out from the staff, shooting upward to strike the beast in its great dark chest. With an exquisite cry of agony, the dragon was encompassed in a brilliant aura of incandescent light. As it soared upward in the sky, the dragon struggled to free itself from the luminous prison, until with a final scream it plunged lifeless to the ground with a deafening crash. Immediately, all of those folk who had sought shelter from the dragon's attack came out of hiding and ran forward to surround him, crying the name of Taliesin Silverbrow in fierce adulation. Chapter 3. The Druidic Council of Albion. After a night of jubilant celebration at a local tavern in the village adjacent to the hill fort at Clodagh-Castiel, Aneurin was invited to an early breakfast with the local magistrate of the walled encampment, Lord Drustin. He was informed that an assemblage of druids had been dispatched from the nearby druid stronghold of Old Sarum, where the Druidic Council had been relocated after their exile from Castle Dor in the Vale of Lyonesse by the archdruid Vandrel. They would arrive later that day, and that Aneurin should avail himself of the hospitality of the Lord's Keep until their arrival. When the embassy did finally arrive, he was more than a little surprised to find that it consisted of a sole acolyte from the Sisterhood of Priestesses who had been sent to fetch him to the council meeting at Old Sarum. Lady Elwyn Fateweaver was more than a little apologetic in the fact that her solitary arrival constituted a barely concealed snub on the part of the High Priestess of the Sisterhood. She went on to explain that the Druidic Council was in disarray, and there was an ongoing struggle for power between the High Priestess of the Sisterhood of the Priestesses and the First Mage of the Brotherhood of the Druids, and that Aneurin should have guarded expectations regarding the level of cooperation he might garner from the Council. Aneurin was quite impressed by this newly arrived emissary, who appeared to be as intelligent as she was beautiful. As they struck out that very afternoon for Old Sarum, Lady Elwyn furnished Aneurin with an unvarnished account of the true state of affairs in Albion, and concluded her candid account that she was immensely relieved by the arrival of Taliesin Silverbrow, proclaiming him to be the Bard of Albion, and hoped that his appearance again in Albion would help set things to right. Along their day-long journey to the time-worn stronghold of Old Sarum, Aneurin was surprised to see the homage that people paid to him. Lady Elwyn remarked that his armor marked him as Taliesin Silverbrow, and along the road there were whispers of voices of reverence, along with outright cries of his recent exploits as Dragon Slayer. When they at last arrived at Old Sarum, they were immediately ushered into the council chambers, where a heated session of the Druidic Council was already in session. What was instantly apparent was the acidic discourse that existed between the two factions of the Druidic Council. On the left side of the room were rows of women clad in sapphire blue robes of the Sisterhood of the Priestesses, led by the fiery elderly High Priestess named Lady Hergarth. On the right side were ranks of men attired in green robes of the Brotherhood, seemingly governed by an indecisive and fawning First Mage named Lord Hergist. The war between the two groups was in full flare, and Lady Elwyn had finally to scream the name of Taliesin Silverbrow before she could get any modicum of quiet in the room. It was Lady Hergarth who first addressed his arrival with a condescending tirade directed at Aneurin that the efforts of Taliesin Silverbrow would not be needed, and the Druidic Council would deal with the matter of the Archdruid Vandrel after its own fashion. While a volley of feminine voices erupted in support of the High Priestess, it was immediately opposed by the raised masculine calls crying in support of the First Mage. The room swiftly fell into pandemonium again, and it took Aneurin summoning the power of his voice booming through the room via the prowess of his armour and pounding his song staff resoundingly on the floor of the chamber to bring quiet to the assemblage. Yet, even then, Lady Hergarth would not be silenced. She began to intone something that sounded like a dark spell, and her whispered voice filled the room with fear. Lady Elwyn quickly responded with an angry warning in Aneurin's ear that she was about to cast a musical strain of compulsion to bend him to her will, and he must act swiftly. Seizing upon one of the secrets hidden within his armor, Aneurin called up the display in his visor of his helm that controlled a cunningly secreted set of tranquilizer darts that had been hidden within the armor's gauntlets. He fired one of the darts at Lady Hergarth, striking her neck, and she quickly slumped unconscious back into her seat. A stunned silence fell across the room, and Aneurin could tell they feared what he might do next. As he called for the adjournment of the council meeting, he found himself secretly reflecting that it was not the greeting that he expected on his arrival in Albion. Chapter 4. Journey to the Carnelian Forest. The next morning, Taliesin Silverbrow took over control of the Druidic Council of Albion. He placed the rebellious High Priestess under house arrest and confined the First Mage to his quarters in Old Sarum. His subsequent conversation with each of his charges left no doubt in either of their minds that he would tolerate no interference or obstruction from either one of them. He also notified the Druidic Council itself of his intentions to travel north under armed escort to Caledonia to rendezvous with the exiled Emperor Lyre in his refuge in the Carnelian Forest. As morning wore on into afternoon, the entourage left Old Sarum with a party of 20 cavalry and 50 infantry, with their 2 charges under armed guard. They struck on a northeasterly tract that would take them first to Shrewsbury and then Sheffield. In the initial 2 days of their journey, it became quickly apparent that Albion had fallen on dark times. Brigands and renegades were rampant, and their caravan fell under attack several times. Once they had reached Sheffield, their numbers began to swell, as soldiers who had fled the service of Albion to the safety of their landholds began to flock to the banner of Taliesin Silverbrow. It would be the 3rd day of their travels that Aneurin finally had his confrontation with a contentious High Priestess and the meek First Mage. Taking on the uglier of the 2 tasks first, he sought out Lady Hergarth in her makeshift prison in the stables at Sheffield. After a brief interview with the rebellious High Priestess finally acquiesced to Taliesin Silverbrow's authority, she revealed that her attack on him had been nothing more than an ill-conceived grab for power, as she saw him as a threat to her position in Albion. The First Mage was an entirely different matter. Aneurin swiftly discovered that Lord Hergus simply did not have the spine to stand up to the High Priestess. Aneurin's first appraisal of the man was that he was a cowardly and timid soul who should not be First Mage, and wondered how he had ever been cast in the role. He soon found out that he was the only man among the Brotherhood of Druids that would take the position. The combative relationship between the High Priestess and the First Mage had existed ever since the fall of Castle Dŵr and the exile of the Emperor. No real inroads had been made in confronting the Archdruid, in large part due to the contention between the 2 factions. It was a situation that Aneurin vowed to rectify. Putting matters on hold as they continued their journey, they reached the southern edge of Caledonia, where they were to experience their first encounter with agents of the Archdruid Vandrel. This took the shape of a meeting with a trio of dragons, one red, one white, and one black. As a result of this conflict, the red dragon was slain in open combat by Taliesin Silverbrow and other members of the Sisterhood and Brotherhood working in concert. Through the offices of the magical musical strains of Albion, the surviving dragons were given a limited capacity for speech. The black one was sent back to his master with a message that the Bard of Albion had returned to Albion and would rally the forces of the realm to rise against the Archdruid. The white dragon presented Aneurin with a quite unexpected opportunity if only he had the courage to seize the moment. She wished to protect the young she would soon bear and would defect to Albion in exchange for sanctuary within its realm. This could be a game-changing situation for the realm in exile, as it would now possess a fledgling force of dragons that could oppose the dragon horde of the Archdruid Vandrel. As the forces under Taliesin Silverbrow crossed from southern Caledonia into northern Caledonia, its numbers had swollen to several thousand soldiers and an equal number of civilians. Once they reached the edge of the Cornelian forest in northeastern Caledonia, Aneurin beheld the majesty of its amber forest, which was a relic of the fall of Atlantis. The trees possessed an outer bark of vitrified amber from the resulting blast of the energy weapons released in the fall of the Aneurin Kingdom. As a result, the forest had radiated with a spectacular display in the afternoon sun as they approached from the west. On their arrival, they were greeted by an imperial welcome committee and taken for an immediate audience with Emperor Lyra. The imperial residence sat within the heart of the Cornelian forest, and as Aneurin was escorted to his awaited meeting with the emperor, he realized that the forest sat right next to the Firth of Forth, and on top of what would be the future site of Edinburgh, thousands of years in the future. He could barely contain his excitement as he realized what that meant. He had come home. The first order of business, when the officers of Albion met with the Emperor in an imperial conclave, was a recognition of the Bard of Albion and his admission to that high office. Aneurin found Emperor Lyra to be an erudite man with a level head for governing his realm. He also found that he had very little tolerance for foolishness. This became immediately apparent when the imperial audience fell upon the selection of a new high priestess of the Sisterhood of the Priestesses and first mage of the Brotherhood of the Druids. At the express urging of the Bard of Albion, the new candidate for the office was Lady Elwyn Fateweaver for the Sisterhood, and her paramour, Lord Aneurin Harper for the Brotherhood. It was Aneurin's logic to the Emperor that the two offices should end their reign of contention by being wedded together in a solemn rite of matrimony that should solidify the bond between those two sacred offices. While this was generally well received, once again Lady Hergarth refused to go quietly. When the Emperor demanded that she abdicate her position and take up a new one alongside the first mage, training new acolytes for the College of Bards, at first she refused. It was only when the Emperor declared that she either accept or face banishment from the realm that she begrudgingly accepted her new appointment. Once the more unpleasant aspects of the imperial audience had concluded, Emperor Lyra and the Bard of Albion could focus on the more important aspects of the meeting, the retrieval of Princess Calestra from her imprisonment in the Ring of Shadows by the Archdruid, and the retaking of the Vale of Lyonesse and laying siege to Castle Dour. In the weeks that followed his arrival at the Carnelian Forest, the imperial entourage encamped there and began to undertake the construction of a new city to house the thousands of soldiers and civilians that had recently arrived with Taliesin Silverbrow. Aneurin found his relationship with Calystra's father Aurelius deepened beyond the fact that he was Emperor later of Albion. They collaborated together daily on restructuring the empire as well as plans for the new city growing around them. It was Aneurin's inspiration that it should bear the ancient name for Edinburgh, and it was christened Dunedin. There were also plans for an imperial wedding, joining Elwyn Fateweather to Aneurin Harper to cement the alliance between the sisterhood of the priestesses to the brotherhood of the druids. As that fateful day approached, there were several unexpected events that came to pass and changed the nature of things. The first was that the archdruid Vandrel launched a surprise attack against Dunedin and sent a squadron of his dragons northward to lay waste to the new city. It was the forward thinking of Taliesin Silverbrow that had foreseen this eventuality and had constructed magical defences around the city to drive off the attack. He had drafted the efforts of the College of Bards, Sisterhood of the Priestesses, Brotherhood of the Druids, as well as the newly ordained Students of Magecraft in the creation of these defences. This, in unison with the assistance of an unexpected ally, made their victory possible. In the midst of the dragon attack, the trees of the Carnelian Forest came alive, and their fulminant magical powers, which heralded the awakening of the spirit of Queen Danu of Atu Denanan, who came to the aid of the forces of Albion. She provided a magical shield against the dragons, which the officers of Albion worked together to drive off the attack. Once the dragons had fled back to their dark master, the city of Dunedin undertook a joyous celebration where it marked the christening of the new city and also the jubilant wedding of the two magical clans of Albion. In the wake of the dragon attack, the Emperor called a war council and drafted plans for marching southward to retake the Vale of Lyonesse and drive the usurper from Castle Dor. The army of Albion had swollen to nearly 10,000 soldiers and began drilling daily in the fields surrounding Dunedin. The magical officers of Albion began to bring new weapons to their arsenal to stand alongside the army. Suddenly the day came when Vandrel attempted a second attack against Dunedin, which was driven off with the combined forces of Albion. The Emperor was seething with rage once the battle was acquitted and issued an imperial decree for the immediate release of Princess Calystra, along with articles surrender against Vandrel, calling for his capitulation or face the consequences. It was a call to war. Chapter 6, Circle of Fire. The Archdruid's response was immediate. He withdrew his force of dragons to the border of Caledonia and the 12 kingdoms of Albion, and began to lay waste to the settlements there. Aneurin advised the Emperor that he ready the army of Albion to march southward, first towards the city of Uberus, which was modern-day York. In the meantime, Aneurin would take a swift-moving party of druids, mages, and priestesses to use the earth magic to attempt to drive off the swarming dragons as they had at Dunedin. On the eve of their departure, Aneurin and his magical party of warriors received an unexpected dispensation. The Earth Queen Danu granted them each with a crystalline stave of rare gems, grown from the very earth, that would channel its power and focus them more directly. This was to have unforeseen consequences. As they rode out the next day and made their way towards the border, they were witness to the carnage of the dragons. In their travels, they encountered 4 villages that had been decimated by dragon fire, with not a single soul surviving the ruin. At the last village, they discovered that the 4 dragons were in the process of their ruinous assault. Rather than confront the dragons outright, Aneurin decided to spring a trap to catch them unawares. The plan called for a force of magical warriors to face the dragons on open ground, forming a circle together to summon the might of the earth. It was a plan fraught with risk, and as they lay in wait for the dragons, Aneurin knew the chances they were taking. They would be exposed to the full might of the dragon fire, with nothing to protect them save the power of the earth and the promising Queen Danu. Yet, as he petitioned each of the officers of their magical force, they were unanimous in their approval that this was the proper course of action. As the sun dawned bright and early the next morning, their resolve was put to the test. As they arrayed themselves in a large circle of more than 24 magical officers with Aneurin at the centre, the dragons spotted them and bore down on them with the full weight of their onslaught. At the final moment, a colossal tower of light erupted from the earth and stabbed skyward to impact the clouds with a detonation of flame. Spreading across the sky like a fiery tsunami, it obliterated everything in an ocean of light. Aneurin was thunderstruck by the awesome display that seemed to go on forever. When it finally subsided, the aftermath was almost as unbelievable as the upheaval itself. Everywhere the earth was scorched and buckled by the heat of the massive firestorm. The ground was covered with a veritable sea of precious gemstones forged in the crucible of the earth flame. At the last, the bodies of the dragons were incinerated, their skeletal remains barely recognizable. Meanwhile, the magical forces of Albion remained unscathed inside their summoning circle. It was a shocked observation of the newly ordained High Priestess, Lady Elwyn, who gave name to what they had just witnessed. She called it Five-Taliesin, or the Circle of Fire. Albion now possessed a mighty new weapon in his arsenal against the Archdruid and his dragon horde. Chapter 7, The Isle of the Goddess. The great army of Emperor Lyra, under command of General Tancred, rendezvoused with Taliesin Silverbrow and his magical officers at Castel Ur, known in the future as Newcastle. There they were also met by General Ethelwulf of Northumbria, who came from the eastern lands of Albion. Aneurin was surprised to see the landscape greatly changed in the time of the Empire. The North Sea stopped at the level of Northumbria, which continued eastward towards Hyperborea and the great ice sheets which covered the northern lands of future Sweden, Norway and Finland. Aneurin gave his report to the Emperor about what transpired at Five-Taliesin and advised that their army of 20,000 strong continued into the western lands of Mercia to meet with General Balor, who is bringing his army from north and central Albion. Yet as they journeyed southward, they were in for another surprise. Storm clouds were massing along the brow of Albion and the northern mountains of Mercia, and it appeared that a colossal thunderstorm was brewing. It grew worse by the hour as hundreds of lightning strikes creased the tumultuous skies. Deciding to make camp and trying to weather the approaching storm, the great army was soon treated to another sound altogether. The sound of dozens of dragons riding within the heart of the storm. Bracing for their oncoming onslaught, they retreated to a far different spectacle instead. Within the heart of the storm, the cries of the dragons soon turned to screams of agony as the tenor of the storm changed dramatically into a furious tempest of unrivaled proportions. The strikes of lightning within its heart grew to the thousands, illuminating the night sky with their catastrophic display. This went on for more than an hour as the forces of Albion could only stand back and witness its unparalleled fury. And just as quickly as it arrived, the cyclone abated and the storm clouds dissipated quickly to reveal the blanket of stars and the night sky. This was quickly followed by yet another surprise. The ground began shaking with the force of a massive earthquake. It grew to titanic proportions, collapsing all the tents in the encampment and sending their horses into frenzied flight. The tremors rippled across the earth with such strength that it was impossible to stand. Finally, the entire army of Albion was thrown down to the ground and now can only wait for the passage of the momentous earthquake. And just as quickly as it had come, the shaking of the earth abruptly ceased. In the wake of the earthquake, Aneurin dispatched riders to ascertain what had taken place in the heart of the storm and the fate of the dragons. Within several hours they returned pale and shaken to report that there was a wide, flat plain which was scorched almost beyond reckoning, littered with the charred bodies of dozens of dragons. While that would have been enough of a surprise, what came next was almost unbelievable. As a result of the earthquake, a huge mound had been thrust up by the convulsions of the earth, and a wide loch had been created surrounding the great mound. Hearing this, Aneurin guessed that it was the work of the Queen of the Earth, Lady Danu, in her support of the forces of Albion. The armies of Albion cautiously moved southward until they came upon the scene of widespread destruction. The plain indeed was covered with the bodies of burnt, slain dragons, and at its centre lay the massive mound surrounded by the glittering waters of the loch. Aneurin immediately named the island mountain and its surrounding loch Ilian Nabandia, the Isle of the Goddess. The armies of Albion marched out to take defensive positions along the wide plain and began clearing away the bodies of the charred dragons. Over the next several days, the soldiers of the armies began to lay the foundation for a new fortress, Fair Draco Castiel, at the summit of the Great Mound that would be where they would meet the forces of the Archdruid in battle. Chapter 8. The War of Restoration. Yet as they laboured from first light until the last rays of the setting sun faded, the dark forces of the Archdruid began to mass along the distant hills to the south. It was Aneurin's plan that they build a network of stone circles around the magical loch to channel the power of the earth against the approaching enemy. As Vandal's dragons began gathering in the skies, and he marshalled his black adversaries of the Dragon Watch before Ilian Nabandia, Aneurin wondered if they would finish in time. Finally, when the appointed time arrived, there were 8 stone circles surrounding the great loch, with its imposing fortress at its summit. And it was not a moment too soon. The great armies of Albion, over 30,000 strong, stood waiting like a veritable sea of humanity for Ilian Nabandia and its newborn citadel. The magical officers of the powers of Albion were arrayed inside 7 of the stone circles, yet they were not enough to man the 8th circle, and Taliesin Silverbrow stood alone at the apex circle. As the black stain of the Dragon Watch gathered at the opposite end of the vast plain, Bandul's dragon horde patrolled the skies, casting their foreboding shadow. The dark apparition of the Archdruid finally appeared to utter his final challenge, and then all hell broke loose. As Aneurin watched as the Dragon Watch swarmed across the plain, and the Archdruid's dragons swooped down to attack the fortress of Ilian Nabandia, he found that he was no longer alone inside the stone circle. At the last moment, the spectral shades of Queen Danu and her companions of the Duo de Danann took their place inside the circle. She bade him to join the fray, and they would stand within the apex circle and fight at Albion's side. Thus began the first great battle in the War of Restoration. It was a contest that would last from the early morning hours until darkness fell that evening. The Dragon Watch fell upon the armies with whispered black incantations and were met by the rallying cries of its impassioned warriors. Across the bleak hours, both red and black blood was spilt over the width and breadth of that plain, until with a final spearhead thrust, the armies of Albion drove the black demons to the ground. The Archdruid threw dozens of dragons at the citadel of Ilian Nabandia, yet the magical officers of Albion created a shield of power over the fortress, protecting it from the rain of dragon fire. At the last, Queen Danu and her cohorts of the Duo de Danann summoned lightning from the very earth itself to strike the dragons dead. Soon the ground before the loch and its citadel were littered with the bodies of slain dragons. Finally, sensing his defeat, Vandal rose in a fierce whirlwind to howl curses at the forces of Albion before fleeing with his demons into the oncoming night. In the wake of their flight, the forces of Albion collapsed in near exhaustion, yet the spirit of Albion arose, and after a few hours of rest, There was frenzied celebration. Queen Dana and her companions of the Tuatha De Danann said their farewells to Taliesin Silverbrow with a promise to come to Albion's aid in the future conflicts that were sure to come. As Albion celebrated his victory, Aneurin's thoughts turned to Calestra and her rescue from the Ring of Shadows. After what he had witnessed that day, seeing the power summoned from the earth within the stone circles, he vowed that he would see an even greater circle that would free his lady love from her imprisonment at last. The very thought brought a mischievous smile to his face, as he could barely believe the audacity of what he was contemplating. He was going to be responsible for the building of Stonehenge. This has been Voices from Albion, a Magnetic Minstrel podcast. I hope that you have enjoyed the show and will tune in next time for the next episode. If you want to know more about the Lost Albion Empire, please go to starofalbion.co.uk, and if you are curious about the band Magnetic Minstrel, please go to magneticminstrel.co.uk. So until next time, stay safe in this uncertain world, my fine lads and lasses, and fare thee well. Voices from Albion, the Magnetic Minstrel podcast, is a production of Keramora Audio. Copyright Richard McPherson, 2020. All rights reserved.